What's up, everybody? Welcome back into another episode of the Lawyer You Know podcast. And I'm really excited to have my guy, JB Biunno from WFLA 8. He is not in his stream center, and I am not on his show, but instead he's coming on mine to talk about a very important case that he was on top of from the beginning, talking to all the players involved, covering every second of every day, every document, everything that happened with the Gabby Petito situation. And with this documentary coming out on Netflix, I thought it was the perfect time to bring him in and talk all things Petito. JB, thank you so much for joining me from home today.
Yeah, it's nice to join you, Peter, finally, that I could finally join you after you've joined so many streams of ours at WFLA, and I can return the favor a little bit. And yeah, this is obviously the documentary everyone's been talking about.
Yeah, and it was really interesting to me, and there were things I didn't know that came out in it. There were certain parts that really struck me, and I want to get your take on it. But before we jump in, most of the time on podcasts, when we really focus on one specific case, I love to have an expert on that case, which is what you are on the Petito case. And anybody that hasn't followed it or that's interested or thinking about watching the documentary, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the Gabby Petito case is all about?
Yeah, I mean, it's always about Gabby. I think people will say Gabby and Brian, but anyone who really knows the case most of all will know that this is a story that really centered on Gabby because for about a 4 week stretch several years ago in 2021, you had the entire really country and a lot of the world, even international attention focused on really the continental U.S. from Florida all the way to Grand Teton National Park, all the way out west. People wanting to know what happened to Gabby. I mean, that was really the key question, right? And then by extension, you find out more about Gabby and the circumstances surrounding her disappearance and the fact that she was on a cross country road trip with her fiance Brian Laundrie. They left July 2021 and they go they start in Florida, they go up to New York, and then they start making their way on their van life cross country road trip, right? Like so many people have on and sharing their stories on the internet. And Gabby and Brian are on this cross country road trip by themselves, together in love, going to spend the rest of their lives with each other. Gabby very much wanting to start really her blog and really making that a big part of her life, perhaps even a career, and showing people, basically being a storyteller, which connected with me because I've always been a storyteller. So wanting to tell stories through her adventures. And that was something that I think a lot of people really grasped onto because either they've done it before on a long road trip with family, or something that they've always wanted to do. So Gabby, young, 22 years old, her whole life ahead of her, wanting to do something as simple as buy a van with her fiance and travel the country and see the sights, so to speak. It was just so relatable for so many people. And then obviously it takes a really dark turn because Brian Laundrie ends up returning in her van to Northport, Florida, right in our area, Peter, in Tampa Bay, Florida, to our south in Northport, returns home to his parents' house without Gabby.
The van the couple was in was last seen here in Northport, Florida, at Gabby's boyfriend's parents' house. Police towed the van away to be processed by the FBI and say Gabby's boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, is not talking.
And Gabby's parents, of course, do everything as you would expect, frantically trying to get a hold of her, file a missing persons report. And then it's, a massive search for Gabby ensues. A lot of pressure on Brian to produce some sort of a response, some answers as to what happened to Gabby. And then Brian disappears, and then all of a sudden you have two young people who are supposed to be together and in love, spending the rest of their lives with each other, both missing. And that was really where the story became what we know it as now, as which was really, I mean, viral. I don't even think begins to describe what the Gabby Petito story was, with how many people were talking about it. And of course, you press the fast forward button a little bit, you find out that Brian did murder Gabby in Grand Teton National Park, returned home to his family in Northport, and he ended up slipping past police surveillance, and a lot of people that were outside the home at the time went into a local reserve in our area and died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. So a tragic story and one that people still talk about, people still message me about, people who still think that Brian Laundrie is out there somewhere, and still I get messages from time to time saying, "Is this him?" I cannot believe that's actually the truth, but here we are in 2025 talking about that, and now it's the big subject of the documentary that was just released on Netflix.
So it's funny you kind of ended with that, not haha, but ironic, because that's been most people I know in my life texting me, asking about this are like, you really think that that letter is real? You think that confession is real? You think that was really, and he wanted to be here where his body could get torn up? Why would he say that? That's what he put like in the letter. And it's like, he did all this because he probably is still out there and his parents are protecting him. And, that becomes part of the story as well. But more people than I thought had that exact reaction when they watched this documentary and got to see everything in it and how it all unfolded.
Yeah, and I think getting a little bit more into the minds of Gabby and Brian, Brian had a dark side, and also too, I think it wasn't really explained very well in the documentary, but something I've talked a little bit about on stream was that there's been a lot made of Brian's relationship with his mother. I don't know if that was something that was discussed enough in the documentary. They only have so much time,
Mm.
obviously, and we talked about it on live stream for years, hours on end for years. So we were able to get really nitty gritty with some of the details and the relationships and the dynamics at play. But Brian had a dark side. There's no doubt. And then Roberta with the burn after reading letter and what she wrote to Brian, and that also too just scratched the surface of what the dynamic was between mother and son. And then, of course, you get more into really where Gabby was in her life at the time. I mean, working at Taco Bell just to save up enough money to afford the van that they actually took on the cross country road trip, and just wanting so much to see the country and tell stories and to share content, which is something that you and I do, Peter. We share content. She wanted to be a content creator, maybe an influencer. Who knows where she wanted that to go? She really never had a chance because she only posted one YouTube video ever. And the documentary points out that it's up to in excess of 7 million views. So we get a little bit more of Brian's backstory, a little more of Gabby's backstory, what brought them together, and ultimately what set them apart.
Yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to, like the cover up when he came home at first and then left. People were thinking the parents were covering for him. They were sending him, helping him escape. What I remember from the documentary and from, experiencing this while it was happening, they did talk about their relationship. They talked about how, she babied him a little bit, how she, was wiping his face at the beach when he got sand on it. There was a clip of them at the beach. The burn after reading letter that, you already mentioned was a creepy, weird letter that she wrote him that you would think she wanted him to burn after he read it, that basically said she would help him get away with crimes if it were to happen. And people applied that to what happened with Gabby. She says she wrote it a long time ago. There's no date on it. People have had their guesses as to when it was really written. There are also some text messages about how Gabby got into it with Roberta, or Roberta wasn't very nice to Gabby because she was living with them at a certain time. It was a little bit, one of the things I didn't fully grasp was Gabby living with all these different people that weren't her parents at the time, as well, was interesting leading up to this, you know, going out on a van life adventure on her own at 20 something years old. What was an interesting dynamic to it, as well as to how this ended up snowballing into disaster, is somebody taking their freedom and trying to enjoy it, and then the worst happening.
Yeah, it was interesting too. Without I think that there's going to be a lot of folks who eventually get around to watching the documentary. If you have
Sure.
seen it, you know what I'm referencing. But there's text messages about Roberta that Brian
Mm.
and Gabby would send back and forth between each other. I think anyone who's ever lived with their parents past the age of 20 or 21 can relate that there's always going to be some friction there. If you're
Mm.
living with your parents, especially with your fiance. I don't know. I think that there's the pie story has been brought up in the documentary, and it's something that we talked a little bit about on stream, which was that Roberta for a meal made a pie for everybody, and that Brian was too preoccupied paying attention to Gabby, swooning over Gabby, his fiance, and not paying enough attention on the pie, and that was a really sore subject for Roberta. I, there, we'll never really know too much beyond, the chess pieces that are on the table right now as to the dynamic, what it was like in that household. We have some things from the text messages that were released in the documentary, the statements and the depositions in the civil case, a lot of things that have come out that just, really get into just how everybody felt about one another. But, Chris is rarely mentioned. It has to be stated that Chris Laundrie isn't really referenced all that much. Now, just because of the optics of the situation, and in the documentary, the body camera video comes out, right? The deputies knocking on the door, wanting answers. It was deputies or officers I think it was actually officers with Northport Police. And they go and they knock on the door, and they're just trying to get some information to put Gabby's family at ease. And Chris and Roberta are standing there at the door multiple times, refusing to cooperate with law enforcement in a simple, what was perceived at the time to be a simple missing persons case. And that's why you have the officers coming out and saying, this is, something's weird here. Something's not adding up. So Roberta in this documentary looks there's a lot of focus on her. And Chris, and this is also too, this has been reflected in our reporting as well, Chris isn't mentioned as much. So a lot has been made in the relationships that exist between Roberta and Brian, and then by extension Roberta and Gabby, and whether or not that had any contributing factor whatsoever in ultimately what happened.
Yeah, and there's a bunch I want to respond to there, because the body cam footage, the amount of it and everything it showed was something that was new to me, or additional at least from what I had already seen. And we'll get into the domestic violence situation. And also, you mentioned another one to me that was, I felt like if I had it at the time, I would have looked at this case very differently from the jump. But first, just to kind of, since this is a legal channel and I'm a lawyer, let's just get out of the way that there's a bunch of legal things happening while this is all unfolding. Criminal charges potentially against Brian for using Gabby's credit cards and things like that. Eventually, when they find Gabby's body after doing a search, the charges come for him being responsible for ending her life. Then when he is found deceased, those charges go away. So a lot of people feel like there wasn't closure. He didn't get convicted because that's just how it works in America. They get abated if you're dead. And so then there are all these civil claims, and the family files civil lawsuits against Brian's estate. That ends up getting a settlement. Then they file civil lawsuits against Brian's parents for intentional infliction of emotional distress, basically. And that is saying something like, through their lawyer, we hope she gets home safe to her family, while the Petitos allege that they knew exactly what happened because Brian came home and told them. Knowing that law enforcement showed up, and the demeanor and the haste in which they were sent away, and the fact that Gabby's van was parked in their driveway, and the way they spoke about it, it's both of their van. It's both of their van. Here's my attorney. You can talk to my attorney. Fine, go ahead, take the van. When they came back and they said, this van's in Gabby's name, and they take the van, to me, we were all talking about it, right? As it was happening real time. And we were like, maybe she's just missing. Maybe they got in a fight. Maybe she ran away. If we had that body cam footage at the time you were first discussing it, how would it have affected the way you viewed this missing person Gabby search?
I'm sorry. So which video are you referencing now?
The video when the cops show up at the Laundrie's house and they say, hey, we just want to ask you a couple questions. They barely come out of the door. They say, we're not talking to you. Brian's here. You can't talk to him. Here's our lawyer. That van is his just as much of it is Gabby's. Then they come back again and say, no, this is Gabby's van. And they're a little more agitated, law enforcement. They're not so nice the second time they show up. And they're like, go ahead, take the van then. And they tow the van. But the demeanor of Brian's parents and what they were saying specifically about having the lawyer, sending law enforcement away, not talking, protecting Brian, not letting Brian talk, how would that have affected the way you viewed the case when we first heard about the Gabby Petito missing persons case? I've never been a big fad diet guy, but I always like to eat clean and the best that I can, which is why I love this sponsor, Green Chef. Green Chef is the #1 meal kit for clean eating, delivering pre-portioned and prepped quality whole foods with limited processed ingredients. Green Chef sends organic, fresh produce, responsibly sourced proteins, and chef-designed recipes in every box for satisfying, nourishing, and convenient meals that make it easy to stick to a clean eating routine. So you can stay on track, even in your busiest days, with salads ready in 5 minutes or less, ready to blend smoothies, and grab-and-go protein-packed breakfasts. They have so many great options. One of my favorites that I got in the last pack was the Caribbean shrimp and coconut rice meal. So you should really check it out because you can thrive all year with clean, easy meals from Green Chef. Go to greenchef.com/LYK free and use code LYKFREE to get started with free salads for 2 months, plus 50% off your first box. Make sure you use the promo code LYK free.
I think, you know what, my answer might shock you, Peter. I don't think it would have made that much of a difference, and I'm going to tell you why. I don't know if it's possible to vilify the Laundries any more than they have been vilified over the course of this process. I think that video being released in the height of this story would have just confirmed how everybody already felt. And look, as a reporter who does interactive work, very similar to what you do, Peter, and reacting to the comments and helping people understand the scope of a story by actually taking their questions live during the broadcast, I can tell you that the court of public opinion on this case, a jury was returned their verdict about 36 hours in. Everyone felt across the board that Chris and Roberta Laundrie knew that Brian had done something sinister, and that they should be held responsible. I mean, it did not take very long for Chris and Roberta to be public enemies number 2A and 2B in the minds of the public. So I don't know if the video being released would have changed all that much. Maybe one thing that probably would have stood out is that even the cops, even law enforcement thought that that something isn't right here if they're not even getting into the home. They're knocking on really the outer door of the home and being basically told, here's my attorney's number, like not even being let in, not saying anything whatsoever. There was very Now look, you're not going to have too many warm interactions with law enforcement given the situation. However, just how it felt and how the officers, actually was the sergeant on the second one, the follow-up visit, the follow-up knock, it would have confirmed really what everybody was feeling at the time, which is that the Laundries know more than what they are, telling law enforcement. And if they've lawyered up so early, that it's for a reason.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things I preach on my channel is you got a lawyer doesn't mean you're guilty. You should get a lawyer if anything is even coming up with a question. And so I'm not saying it would have made me think that, oh, Brian for sure did it. What it would have made me think is, first off, I didn't even know because things were so swirly at the time. It's like, was he there? Was he not there? They went on vacation, then he left. It's like, I didn't even know. Like, that would have confirmed, obviously, that Brian was in fact there and that they weren't talking to anybody. And from my perspective, that would at least have raised more of a concerning eyebrow, probably very similar. I would have felt more similar to how the cops felt at the time, that like something weird is going on here. Let's continue to search. Let's look at this. Let's tow this van. Let's look at the van. Let's do more of an investigation. Let's push more for that. I definitely felt more of that watching that body cam footage at the time than I remember myself feeling and thinking at the time, because I was trying not to villainize the Laundries or Brian Laundrie at the time and just hoping for the best and that they do this search. And some stuff came out about the domestic violence. Maybe they separated again. That's kind of what I was hoping for. And I think as things continued to trickle out, it just got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah, and look, I took some flack from people back in the height of this story for reminding the simple reminder of innocent until proven guilty. I mean, there were people who wanted the Laundries paraded through the streets. I mean, as criminals.
Showing up at their house.
And I was, as a journalist, you have to remind people that they have not been charged with a crime, that they have, that while the court of public opinion is saying one thing, it's really only the court of law that matters. And there were people who who sent me very pointed messages, who accused. But look, and at the end of the day, I have to do with my job as a reporter. I'm not defending the Laundries by any means. I'm just reminding people that we have law and order in this country for a reason. And at this, and also too, there was a time people don't remember. There was a time in this story as it was reaching the the height of of being viral, where Brian wasn't charged with anything either. And Brian wasn't ever really. It was so obvious to people that he was a suspect, but a suspect, there has to be a crime that was committed. Gabby was missing.
Right.
There
No
wasn't a
body.
crime yet. She was just a missing adult. And then you had Brian, who wasn't charged with anything because he wasn't talking to law enforcement. There was nothing. It was when the federal, I'll never forget it. I remember every little part of this story. It was use of unauthorized access devices, which I'm going to be honest, when I first got that charge, and it said Brian Laundrie is charged federally with use of unauthorized access devices. That's not one I had,
Sure.
ready to go in the
Not
cheat
assault.
sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one, I had to look that one up, and basically it was use of an unauthorized access of a digital device to steal or transfer funds that do not belong to you. We would later find out it was a Zelle of $700 that Brian made from Gabby's account to his own. So we didn't know if it was a credit card at the time. We didn't know if it was a tap to pay kind of thing. We didn't know really what it was, but it was a Zelle payment. And that was when Brian could officially be labeled as a suspect in a crime and was wanted by federal authorities. There was a very weird, uncomfortable time before that charge came out, where Brian was just Gabby's fiance and really a person of interest in her disappearance, and not really wanted for any particular charge. So there was a lot of, man,
Moving
it
parts,
was
for
a
sure.
time where there was a lot going on.
Yeah, and another part of the documentary that really stuck out to me as learning new information was we saw body cam footage with the domestic violence issue, which we can give an overview of while they're driving in Moab. There are calls to 911. A guy is slapping a female. A female looks hysterical in the front seat, whatever it is. Law enforcement shows up, pulls over the van, takes them out, has a discussion with them, and there is a domestic violence incident that starts getting investigated. And we heard about it. We saw some body cam footage about it, but this was the most extensive body cam footage I can remember seeing in the documentary that clearly showed some of the injuries to Brian Laundrie's face and some of the injuries to Gabby Petito's face. But more importantly, it recorded them discussing what happened and their demeanors at the time. What was kind of your thought watching the documentary and going through the body cam of that incident in more detail?
Yeah, we had received as a news outlet, and I think it was put online also as well pretty quickly. That video. It's interesting because the documentary, there are some things that are very new, and then other things that have been released. That
Yep.
one we had combed through. I'd watched. I'd lost count of how many times I've watched
Sure.
it, and it's interesting because it's one of those videos where you watch it again and then you realize
See
something
something
different.
different. Yeah.
And even my watching of the documentary, Peter, I'm remembering certain things, notes that I had taken back in 2021 when I was watching it on repeat, and trying to understand and see if I was missing anything in that video that was important. But um, look, I think looking at that video, I think the one thing that really jumps out to me now, all these years later, is that there needs to be a larger conversation about law enforcement and domestic violence calls that they respond to. I don't think I think it's it. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but there is an overwhelming number of domestic violence or domestic allegation calls that come in on a regular basis in this country. There have been words thrown around. I don't want to use any of them here. I'm not big on certain labels, but it's an enormous problem. I think in this country, I think it's fair to say, and a problem that isn't receiving enough attention. Just what is law enforcement to do when they are thrusted into this situation where they have partner one and partner two clearly, um, something has transpired between the two of them in a domestic case, and one of them is going to say one thing, one is going to say the other. Sometimes things are going to add up. They're going to say the same thing, but what is really the truth, and how can law enforcement on the scene of that call ascertain as to whether or not charges are appropriate and whether or not these two? That's where the lethality assessment law comes into play that the Gabby Petito Foundation has been fighting for. We could take the entirety of this particular podcast, this video, and talk just about domestic violence. But I think that video, the actual video, and watching it too from all the different angles, I think that's what people forget. It's not just one video.
Right.
You have one law enforcement officer talking to Gabby a majority of the time, one talking to Brian a majority of the time. You have them huddling up afterwards and trying to figure out the best course of action, whether or not it's to proceed with a charge and really against Gabby because she was determined to be the aggressor, or if they should be separated for the night. You're watching it from front to end from multiple angles, and ultimately what they decide is obviously, because we're talking about this in such detail, they decide to separate them for the night and not to file charges against, of all people, against Gabby, because the original call comes in Moab from a witness who says, I saw a man hitting a woman, and yet after they spend a good amount of time interviewing both of them separately, it's determined that Gabby is the aggressor, and that really that received a very, very loud internet reaction years ago, and still has to this day, to tell you the truth, as to I think it's a learning experience. I think bottom line is that video is a learning experience, and hopefully law enforcement agencies across the country use it as a launching point for a conversation as to how to respond or not to respond to a certain situation.
I mean, I definitely think there needs to be more training. But you can say that in a lot of areas for law enforcement generally. Some of the things that stuck out to me is they even say, one of the officers even says something like, the fear is, the female is being abused here, and we separate them and they go back together, and then the worst happens. They say something like that in their normal discussions to each other. And there was not consensus really on how to handle it, but they also were like trying to do everyone a solid and not get anyone in too much trouble. And one of the things that stuck out to me was the difference in demeanor. Brian was kind of like jokey and calm and like, yeah, she gets like this sometimes. And the officer even says, like, my wife, not to Brian, but in his car, he's like, yeah, my wife has anxiety too. And they just get like this sometimes where they're impossible. Gabby's frantic, crying, can't calm down. Like, when you watch it now, and context is everything, right? And hindsight is everything. It's really shockingly sad to think of someone in that state and not getting help by people that are supposed to help them. There is a lawsuit against them, right? Against Moab?
Lawsuit against Moab, yeah. That lawsuit is ongoing. The civil lawsuit between the two families was settled, obviously, but the remaining active lawsuit is in Utah, and so it was one thing that I really took note of in several years ago in 2021 when that video was being dissected across the internet, was really listening to victims of domestic talk about how it would send a shiver down their spine watching Brian in that video, accusing Brian. My opinion here is I'm talking about my opinion. I'm a journalist, so I'm just always going to highlight the opinions of people that I that are in our comment section or interact with our streams. That's really what my role is. So I'm talking about people who have been victims of domestic abuse that watch Brian in that video, and it would send a chill throughout their entire body because of what they perceive to be manipulative behavior. That Brian was so manipulative of the accusation, that Brian was so manipulative within his own relationship that he could even be manipulative of law enforcement responding to that situation, where he's developing and establishing camaraderie with law enforcement, like you noted, Peter, trying to joke around, like, ha 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 ha, my wife this, my wife that, or and that that really made people sick to their stomachs. I know, because I got a lot of messages, private DMs from people who said that, that it reminded them of being in a horrific situation that they felt was something they could not escape. And watching that level, watching someone allegedly be so manipulative, and being able to do it not just within their own relationship, but do it to even law enforcement, really rub people the wrong way, especially victims of domestic. And it's one of those things where, again, the word was training, right? You
Yeah.
hope that it's a video that is referenced in the future, so that we all learn, law enforcement, all of us can learn and try to pick up on the signs of um, what's really happening behind the scenes.
I absolutely hate dry skin, which is why I love today's sponsor, OneSkin. OneSkin was founded in 2016 by an all-woman team of scientists with PhDs in skin regeneration, stem cell biology, immunology, and bioinformatics. They developed the OS01 peptide, the first ingredient to reverse skin's biological age by reducing the accumulation of senescent cells, a key driver of skin aging. They're founded by an all-woman team of skin longevity scientists. OneSkin is redefining the aging process with their proprietary OS01 peptide, the first ingredient proven to help skin look, feel, and behave like its younger self. So get 15% off with code LYK at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co, not .com, with code LYK. After your purchase, they're going to ask you how you heard about them. So please support our channel and tell them we sent you. Invest in the health and longevity of your skin with OneSkin. Your future self will thank you. Yeah. And for us with friends and things like that. But yeah, I think I may have said earlier on that the parents' lawsuit was ongoing, but this is the one that's ongoing. Those two had settled already. And was there only three? Moab, Brian, and the parents? Were those the three lawsuits civilly?
Well, yeah, you had the lawsuit that was between the two families. And then by extension, I don't know if you remember, we also had the Stephen Bertolino, the attorney for the
Oh, that's right.
Laundries,
That's right.
yes, also get added in
Yep.
as a co-defendant to the lawsuit, which
Yep.
I think surprised even you, Peter. Surprised a lot of people, because a lawyer who was just supposed to be acting as an agent, legally representing his
Yeah.
clients, to be basically brought in as a co-defendant in a civil case was considered to be, well, eyebrow raising for many in the law community. But yeah, there was that lawsuit, and then the lawsuit against Moab
Yeah.
for
How
you
they
know
handle this.
how they handled it.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I want to focus on the documentary as much as possible, but I wanted to correct that. If I did say that, I may have just said a slew of lawsuits. But so the next thing that was shocking to me that I had never seen before, maybe you had, was I don't know what you want to call it, B-roll, outtakes, raw footage of Gabby Petito's YouTube videos. So you said she posted one, but there were multiple shots and things. She talked about editing videos. So when you make a YouTube video on a vlog like a van life, you take a shot here, you take a shot there. Everything looks so glorious and amazing. You're a happy couple, beautiful sights. It's so amazing to be traveling in a van together. But the outtakes also get, when the camera's rolling, but you stop, and some behind the scenes that people are never going to see, or I should say, you think people are never going to see, after cut may be called, or things you can edit out. And that was pretty chilling to watch their relationship, the two of them, the interactions, each of them individually, and then to read the text messages that, I can do better as a, individual female doing the van life. He said, I can buy the van from him, those kind of texts when it seemed to kind of go wrong. But what did you think about I don't know what you want to call it, the raw footage of her YouTube videos that she was filming while they were out on the tour?
I think that there are some mannerisms exhibited by Brian that show that he wasn't all that crazy about what Gabby was trying to do and share her experiences. I don't. In covering this story, it seemed as if that Brian really there's no doubt that he had a love for Gabby. Love can mean a lot of different things to different people, but certainly that he loved her enough to spend the rest of his life with her. But one of the things that really jumps out to me is that he also loved not sharing her all that much. Right. I think that became really evident in the text messages, and in Rose's testimony during this documentary. And I've met Rose, and hearing her talk more eloquently about just the friction that would exist between Brian and Gabby as a result of even their friendship. It's Brian clearly did not. Brian wanted as much attention from Gabby as possible. That's basically the way that it appears in this documentary, and so it's interesting because his mannerisms could be chalked up to just being annoyed. Okay, what is this? Take 16, take 17. It could him having a moment where he's clearly annoyed could either just be, it could have been the end of a long day, or when you add it up with the rest of the outtakes, so to speak, is it just painting a very clear picture that Brian didn't support Gabby in her dreams of basically being a vlogger, a blogger, if you will, and documenting their experiences across the country. Yeah, no, that was very interesting, Peter. It's goes to show I've combed through every minute detail of this case. Um, I, Probably look just as much or more than any other reporter on the planet. I have every micro detail I have covered, but watching this documentary and seeing things that I've never seen before was very, very interesting to me, and that being one of them.
Yeah, and to me, I am going to give a lot of grace when it comes to filming something, and the camera turns off and you're a little bit down, the adrenaline comes down, whatever, or you didn't get the shot, or your wife. I'll just put it this way: my wife wants to take a picture, and we end up having to take 17 pictures. I'm just like, can we get this? So people may think I'm kind of psycho if they saw the B-roll of that. So I get that, and I want to give a little grace with that, but I do think the context is really important, and some of the context that was added to that again that I had never seen was some of the text messages between Brian and Gabby where he's like, I'm crying so much. I just want to be with you. I feel like I'm losing you to those jerks at Taco Bell or whatever it is. And it was all that kind of stuff. And she kept saying, like, no, I don't want to make you cry. Like, I'm sorry. And it was, again, it feels like what people describe as controlling, manipulative behavior. And that's really where you take the whole context. And it's obviously Roberta Laundrie, like you said, and Brian Laundrie are the villains of the documentary. And some would just say factually the villains of the story. He admitted in writing, assuming that it's true, that he ended her life in a way that he says was
Merciful.
to save her or have mercy on her because she had fallen and hurt herself. Yet none of the testing and reports and medical examiners kind of line up with that. And so he is the villain of the story, which I think adds to the fact to how we look at these. I'll just say, to me, when he has an admission and we have the other details that show what parts of his admission may be true, the strangulation, and others not, and you see these text messages, you see these outtakes of the video, and it does add a lot of context, and just it's a brutal feeling to watch for Gabby Petito and her family.
Yeah, and let's note on a couple things based on what you just said. One, the word that he used to describe people that work at Taco Bell is lowlifes. Uh, can we? People that work at Taco Bell are wonderful human beings. Okay, I don't know if you're a Taco Bell guy. I've had Taco Bell in my life. They're wonderful human. That was Brian. Just didn't do himself any favors. Not that he has any chance of redeeming himself in any way, shape, or form. But I just thought that was such a low blow. Um, Look, um,
I almost said something mean about Brian Laundrie that I would have probably regretted, but I won't. But it's like, I'll just say this. People could have said stuff about his work situation and living situation, probably, and made light of it if they wanted to. I'll just say. And that's what always makes me think of the people that take shots like that and make the low blows. It's like they're usually ones a little insecure about their own setup right now, right? Because Gabby was out there working Taco Bell or wherever to pay for the life they were going to have and wanted to have. And that says a lot to me about Gabby Petito and people at Taco Bell and everywhere else. Like, there are good people and bad people everywhere. And just because you work at Taco Bell doesn't mean you're a lowlife.
no, and so yeah, just want to defend some of
Sure,
the folks out there
exactly.
that might be watching anywhere in the fast food industry.
Yeah.
No, okay, so back. What was the other question? The second point that
So,
I think.
so generally, I'm just saying, to me, like, the whole context does show them as the villains of the story to me, but it's important that they showed everything and not just a YouTube clip. And, there could be more texts and, whatever it may be. And it seems like he took her side when she was fighting with Roberta a few times. And so I agree with you. I think there's a lot of indication that in his way of love, he loved Gabby Petito. Is that a way anybody should be loved? I'm not so sure. But again, we're kind of pontificating on a relationship now when the reality is a lot of this that led up to the final result. What can we do to prevent that? What can we learn from it? Which kind of leads me to the main question I wanted to ask you about this documentary, knowing so many of the people involved, being so heavily invested in it, and knowing so much about it, digging in so deep. Why do you think they made this documentary? Why do you think the family wanted to be involved? Because they were heavily involved. They went into Gabby's background and being born and her family life. It was so brutally sad. Cute little baby pictures, like all of that stuff just hits me. I've got an 11-year-old daughter, and it hits deep to the core. Why do you think they wanted to make this documentary?
I well, to this day, people when they whether it's in person or whether it's a DM of some kind or commenting on a post that I've made, people have been waiting for the a documentary that that the family supports. The four co-parenting unit of Joe, Tara, Nicole, and Jim. Now that this really, I mean, the story, you could make the argument the story's never really over, but the story really hit, slamming the book shut that point when the civil lawsuit was settled because, at least the story of will there ever be justice for Gabby and will anyone ever be held responsible for the family and for a lot of people, that was really the final sort of thing that had to be addressed was the civil lawsuit between the families. For the families, Gabby's story is never over because the legacy through the foundation, or Gabby's legacy through the foundation, will always live on, and Gabby will always inspire change. But why was it made? Because we have the four co-parents being featured in it, Gabby's closest friends, very prominent documentary filmmakers, and because there's still an appetite for this story, even all these years later. From Gabby's family's perspective, I don't want to speak for them. I talk to them pretty routinely, but it's just because anything that they can do to bring exposure to the foundation, I they are all in on that, and they want to make sure that Gabby's life was not in vain, was not taken in vain, that Gabby's life is going to mean something for so many people. I've had some really, really deep conversations with Joe Petito about how passionate he is to bring attention. It was mentioned in the documentary, and I don't think that they could have done it way more justice. Joe Petito's mission to make sure that more missing people in this country,
I want to get to
of
that in a second.
minorities,
Mhm.
black, indigenous, brown, just any
Of all
minority
colors.
whatsoever. What's that?
Of all colors, like
Of all
missing
colors.
persons of all colors, we need to highlight. They need to get the audience and whatever it takes to find them, the resources behind them, because that was a big thing about this documentary is, and that was a big thing at the time. Cute little white girl gets all this attention and all these eyes and all these resources to try to find her and becomes a national news story or maybe international. What about everybody else? That was a big part of the story. I think he said at first I was kind of like offended and annoyed, and then when I learned the statistics, I was shocked.
Yeah, Joe is unbelievably passionate about bringing. I sat at an event where he was on a panel last year, bringing awareness to missing Indigenous people in various sections of the country, and he speaks so passionately about it because he is passionate about it, and so. To go back to your original question, Peter, which is why is this documentary being made? One, because it's infotainment, it's entertainment, however you want to label it. People are going to click on it, and I'm sure it's bringing a lot of business to Netflix because there's so many people who felt impacted directly or indirectly by Gabby Petito's story. And then for the family, I'm just taking a guess here, it's all about the foundation. Every time I ask them a question, it always comes back to the foundation in one way, shape, or form. So from their perspective, I can almost guarantee you, from knowing them as well as I do, that anything that they can do to highlight the foundation, to get more action around it, and more support so that they can continue to pursue policy changes, various legislation, doing things to work with law enforcement on training, anything that they can do to help prevent future tragedies, and not just for missing white girls, as you noted, cute little white girls. No, also for people of all colors. That's something that's really enormously important to all four of them. And I know it's the real deal. It's the real article. When I talk to them in front of the camera, they're talking about the foundation. When I talk to them off camera, off the record, it's mostly about the foundation. It's what they're really passionate about these days.
Yeah, from my perspective, just watching it, not knowing the family personally, but just trying to catch the vibe from the actual documentary, it seemed incredibly important to do three things basically: tell Gabby's story from their point of view, who she was, how she was loved, who was in her life. That was a big part of it. It was 3 episodes, and I kind of got 3 points from it. Number two was domestic violence issues, protecting people in those situations, law enforcement being trained better, making better decisions. And then number three, exactly what you said about the missing persons. And what's funny is I'm going to link the Gabby Petito Foundation.org, and their About Us says the mission of the foundation is to address the needs of organizations to support locating missing persons and to provide aid to organizations that assist victims of domestic violence situations through education, awareness, and prevention strategies. And that really is a big part of the vibe of what I felt like was the purpose of this documentary in whole. And I will just add one little point on the end that I also, if I take my lawyer hat off, which I basically have for most of this podcast, it made me at the time when you don't know everything, I'm like, man, they're really jumping quick to the Laundries know something and they're refusing to share it with us. So they're protecting him. And, we're turn on the Laundries immediately. And at the time, it's like, whoa, we don't really know. This documentary does let you understand why, as a parent, they almost immediately got there. And I understand, and I can't say I wouldn't do the same thing as a parent if I were them. That's one of the things I learned as well watching this documentary.
Yeah, it's interesting because since this whole story, I've become a parent now, and so it's hard to fathom what
Can't
you would do
imagine.
in that. What you yeah, you can't. It's hard to fathom what you would do. But I've had people reach out to me, parents who've reached out to me who have said, "Look, if I was told by my son that he had done something extremely evil, let's say his fiance, look, I, there's nothing that there's no bone in my body that is going to be moved towards helping cover that up. I've had so many people reach out to me over the years and saying how Chris and Roberta could could not could remain silent this entire time. It's overwhelming how many people feel like they would not do what the Laundries have done. Now, to be fair, you have to be in that situation to really know how you would act. Given it, this is your remember, they have Brian and Cassie, but Brian had a very interesting relationship with his mother, and so it's their child. It's like, what would you do in the situation if you were just told of something that had happened regarding Gabby? It's difficult to say, but I've had people who have said that they would not have acted the same way that the Laundries did.
And I get that, and I would like to say how I would act, but it's one of those situations I think it's impossible for us to understand, especially because I would think in my head, and who the heck knows, but maybe he told them a similar story to what he wrote in the book, that he was having mercy on her, and they're like, well, that's still a crime, and they had a little bit of a different conversation than what the context tells us now, what actually happened in the mountains there. And it's an impossible situation. I would like to think I would do the right thing and would hope that I would, and that my morals and values and faith are deeper than, something difficult happening here in this life. But again, it's one of those situations where I truly think it is so hard to ever put yourself in either of these sets of parents or any of the three sets of parents' shoes in dealing with the most tragic, impossible situation they've ever been in.
Yeah, and I think that one of the reasons why Gabby's family is so beloved is because, given if so many parents out there who have said to me, I would have done the same thing if I was Gabby's mom. Everything that Gabby's mom did, everything that Joe Petito did, appearing at the press conferences, the fact that Jim went out there to Wyoming, flying out fact that they were in constant contact, like the family's response, Gabby's family's response, has been universally applauded across the internet because not even just during the tragedy, but even to this day with what they're doing with the foundation. And it's just because they feel that's a relatable thing, that Gabby's four, parents, from Nikki and Jim to Joe and Tara, that's a relatable way that they would act given, look, the tragedy of that, of what happened to Gabby. But at the same time, it's so difficult to put yourself in the shoes of others given what happened in this story that took all of these twists and turns, and to say, oh, I would have done this, I would have done that. That's okay. Yeah, I understand that it's easy to type that into your keyboard, but if it actually happened to you and you're emotionally distressed, unable to sleep, asking yourself millions of questions, dealing with law enforcement, attorneys, endless media interview requests, and the entire world is focused in on your respective families to say that you would have done X, Y, and Z versus A, B, and C. Look, you weren't there. That wasn't your situation. It's hard to say how anyone would have acted in any particular spot.
Yeah, I agree. But I think at the end of the day, the documentary, in my opinion, accomplished those three goals that I said, and that, I was kind of getting from it, and that you were kind of saying you figured would be important to the family as well. Before we go, is there anything else you wanted to point out, highlight, found surprising, something you didn't know before? Like you said, you've kind of combed through everything in this case about the documentary.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll be hopping on my stream at some point, and hopefully able to talk a little bit more about it. Um, yeah, I'll give you one. Gabby's voice being recreated.
Oh yeah, it's a little weird.
Yeah, and as a storyteller, as someone who knows people who make documentaries, it's such a bizarre choice to recreate Gabby's voice like that, and then also too to only use it in these couple of interesting moments where it was introduced very early in the documentary to give her a voice, and then to not use it in other spots. I just thought was just a strange decision, and to hear the voice of somebody who is dead, and also too, having covered this story, I think it hit me weird because I've covered this story so much, and I've watched so many videos with Gabby in them, and to hear her voice being used after her. Yeah, I mean, look, creative decisions were made. I'm sure that there were creative decisions that were made for good reason. If you ask the documentary filmmakers, I just thought that might be off-putting to some people. For me, it was a little bizarre.
Yeah, that's funny. And again, I am not a creative. I am not a filmmaker. Like, that struck me as a little bit weird at first, and then I was just kind of over it. But that was the journal entries generally were pretty impactful as well, to kind of get her frame of mind, the text messages, anything you can get kind of real time and what was happening and going through her mind and her parents' mind and Brian's, to me, was so, just shed so much light, and added so much context to a story that had so many unknowns when it started.
You had all this new material of Gabby, clearly,
Mhm.
and you have her YouTube video. You have access to the family was clearly very, very open in allowing things going back to Gabby's childhood being used. It was just, I don't know, just a weird. I'm curious. You know what? I'll ask people in your comment section on the Lawyer page on whatever platform they're watching this on. Let's say it's on
Mhm.
YouTube. Like, comment below. Am I alone in thinking that was a little bit strange? Like, I'm curious how it made people feel. Because hearing somebody who's deceased, I know that it's been done in movies and stuff like that but we're talking about a girl who was at the age of 22 by her fiance in the woods alone, and she died alone. I mean, that's, or was left to be alone. It's just that I'm curious to see what your commenters say in the comment section on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's definitely, yeah. It brings me back to Paul Walker and Fast and Furious, where they CGI'd and AI'd him to play the final scene or whatever it is. It's definitely something that's happening now, and the new technology, people are going to try to use it and push it. And try to see what they can do and how real they can make it feel. I mean, my guess is there'll be some people that liked it, some people that didn't like it, but it definitely struck me as a little bit strange when I first heard it.
When it's an A-lister of the Fast and Furious franchise, it's one thing. I think when you're talking about a victim, it's just going to hit the ears a little bit different for people. That's a guess. That's a guess. I'm very, very curious. We could have actually spent this whole time, Peter, just talking about, the fascinating hypotheticals that exist. If Brian Laundrie had been captured by law enforcement, what a case would have looked like in the state of Florida. And I can tell you from a media perspective, it would have been an absolute circus. It would have been absolutely crazy. I'd be curious what kind of a plea Brian would have entered. But, it's a fascinating, I know, given your channel breaking down cases, it's an interesting hypothetical. He was, again, as a reminder to folks, he slipped past the police surveillance and took his own life in the woods. But if he had been captured, how this case would have been stacked legally, and whether or not there was any case legally for Brian and his legal representation to state his case of innocence of any kind whatsoever, that would have been an interesting sort of hypothetical, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, that type of stuff is endless, including, if we want to call them conspiracy theories, that he's still out there, that he's still alive, all the thought that his parents helped him escape or helped him hide, and then they found him or the area where he was not long after they started searching. There's things that add to that, right? People didn't just make those things up without any reasonable inferences from the evidence we may have, as we say in the law. But JB, I really appreciate you coming on, man, adding so much context to this. People can check you out talking about this as well. I'm sure you will over the next coming weeks as people continue to watch this documentary. And they'll check out your Hey JB streams in the new Stream Center, which is going to be awesome. When's that going to be done?
Yeah, no, construction is ongoing right at this very moment. Actually, is one of the reasons I'm not at work today, is because I don't not too many live streams to do when they're working on your set. So the paint is still drying. The new Stream Center will debut soon. I'm really excited. I hope people join us, and that'll be on the WFLA YouTube and Facebook pages for some new Hey JB content in the future. Peter, it's always a pleasure. I'm glad I was able to finally return the favor. And I think one thing that we have also learned is that my home studio is not nearly as cool as your home studio. So I clearly have some work to do in the home studio arena.
It's like we have your Stream Center here. That's an A+, your home studio, that's a lower grade, and mine are just somewhere in the middle. Mine just sticks somewhere in the middle, but that Stream Center is top notch. So can't wait to be back and do more stuff in there, as I'm sure these wild cases will continue because it's the world we live in. But until next time, that's all we got. We're out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.